It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Including these aliens in the apportionment of congressional districts impacts representation in Congress and undermines the constitutional principle of one person, one vote. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens.
Lauren Boebert is about to get schooled by one of the most skilled Democrats in Congress, Representative Jamie Raskin.
It's always delightful to hear my friend from Colorado speak. One thing that I do want to point out, however, because there might be some students in the gallery today, is that there can be no illegal aliens and there can be no green card holders in Congress, because the Constitution very clearly specifies that you must have been a citizen for 7 years before you run for the House, and you must have been a citizen for 9 years before you run for the Senate, and you must be a born U.S. citizen in order to run for president of the United States. I think that my colleagues should probably relax with some of the hyperbole and exaggeration here. After all we're saying is let's keep doing what we've done since 1790 in the country. This is the way that the census and the reapportionment have always been run in the United States of America, and what they're proposing is obviously a radical departure from what the Constitution ordains. This is the way it's been done since the beginning of the Republic. The language in the 14th Amendment is perfectly clear that it's all of the persons of the state who have to be counted. I thought you guys were constitutional textualists. I thought you followed the language of the Constitution, the original intent of the Constitution, and the precedent that has been set.
Raskin turning the tables on Republicans, arguing that they aren't adhering to their own principles and how that reveals much more than the obvious hypocrisy. What it really shows is that they are willing to do whatever they think is necessary to get back into power and never let go, even if it's at the expense of dehumanizing tens of millions of people.
You can't just say, well, I don't like what's in the Constitution, and therefore I'm going to ignore it. Only U.S. citizens of majority may vote in federal elections. That's federal law. But everybody, including children who are U.S. citizens, are counted, even though they can't vote in federal elections. The last president tried to include a citizenship question on the decennial census in 2020 and tried to count only U.S. citizens for the purposes of census and reapportionment. And the effort failed miserably in court for obvious reasons.
Now that Raskin has thoroughly dispatched the idea that only citizens should be counted in the census, Jim Jordan will try to save face for his party.
If you went out on the street today and you asked someone anybody on the street, say, you know, we do a census every 10 years. We count up the number of people in the country. Do you think it's okay if we find out how many of those are citizens? That person would say, well, yeah, but aren't you already doing that? That's what they would think. All this bill says is let's count persons, like the Constitution says, let's count everyone, but let's also find out how many are citizens, because that's what should determine how congressional representation, how apportionment is done. We ask all kinds of other questions on the census anyway. What's wrong with asking sort of the fundamental question, are you a citizen of this great country, the greatest country ever? That's all this does. And that is important number to get, important information to get when you're figuring out who's going to represent how many congressional members from each of the respective states. This couldn't be more simpler. I don't know why they're opposing it, but they always do.
Jim Jordan's argument is full of holes and even more hidden premises. The real issues at play here, the need to propose a constitutional amendment to change the census rules and the discriminatory nature of asking a citizenship question on a document that has nothing to do with someone's citizenship status. The census is about sheer numbers, so the government can allocate funding appropriately based on how many people are in the United States and where. The results determine where new hospitals, schools, and even supermarkets should be built.
The Constitution is the Constitution, and nobody yet has laid a glove on the Constitution or explained how the Supreme Court erred in the unanimous Evanwell decision. None of them has been able to explain away the very plain language of the 14th Amendment, which says that it's all the persons of the states who are counted, not the citizens, and that's been the basis for both the census and the reapportionment since the country began.
H.R. 7109 would then ensure that only citizens are included in the apportionment base by which representation in Congress is allocated. Non-citizens comprise nearly 7% of the total population of the United States. 7%. But non-citizens are not evenly distributed among the states, and some states end up with greater representation in Congress based on a higher concentration of non-citizens. This dilutes the one person, one vote principle for citizens in states with fewer non-citizens.
Jim Comer and the Republicans are hiding behind the guise of fairness in representation to exclude non-citizens from any form of representation at the federal level. The Republican logic goes like this. Since non-citizens can't legally vote, they shouldn't count at all towards the census population data that determines how many federal representatives each state is awarded. Now let's get back to Jamie Raskin shooting down this bogus Republican bill.
So for all of you textualists out there, the plain reading of the text of the Constitution is clear. For all of the constitutional originalists out there, the original purposes have been carefully articulated and never rebutted. For all of you members who like to follow precedent, well, every apportionment in the United States since 1990 has included every single person residing in the United States. The addition of a question about citizenship will deter many immigrants, not only undocumented, but persons with green cards and other forms of lawful status from completing the census. Many non-citizen immigrants who are seeking asylum or are refugees will avoid responding because of uncertainty over their status and fear of arbitrary law enforcement action.
You know, this fear is not unfounded. The hostility is intentional, which is exactly how the Republicans want anyone who isn't a citizen to feel by introducing this bill.
The census is to count every person. The problem is the level of illegal persons that now live within the continental borders of the United States has reached such a point that it thwarts the intended service of our representative republic.
Higgins going mask off on the true intentions of this bill after Comer's tactful introduction is perfect representation of today's Republican Party. Not a lot of politics, just straight hate.
45 million illegals, that's 60 congressional seats. And where do you think those illegals are being drawn to live? In sanctuary states and sanctuary cities, densities of populations, which have advertised and welcomed and brought these illegal citizens there. Why? Why do you think this has been one of the core tenets of agenda of the Democrat Party? Is to thwart the very essence of our representative republic by stacking the deck during the census, whereby apportionment for congressional representation will be permanently shifted to sanctuary states and cities. This is the game plan, man. It's a decades-long agenda to permanently transform this body.
Higgins is just repackaging and sanitizing the white supremacist great replacement theory here.
Apportionment was reflective of American citizens living within the United States. Our representative republic is at risk.
Now let's hear Raskin's rebuttal to this gross display.
The Supreme Court has been very clear about this, and the founders were very clear. There are lots of people who are not voters who get counted in the census. Start with children. Do we think children should not be counted in the census because they're not voters? That makes no sense. Every period of American history, there have been different periods of xenophobia and anti-immigrant fervor towards Germans, towards Irish, towards Mexicans, you name it. Okay, so there's nothing unusual about what we're going through where people want to whip up hysteria about the foreign-born. And in fact, you can find lots of periods in American history where there was a greater percentage of foreign-born people in the country than there are today. And it also stimulated the same kinds of political movements that some of our colleagues identify with. This is a nation that was founded by people who were open to immigration. And Tom Paine said America would become an asylum to humanity, not an insane asylum, but a place of refuge for people fleeing from political and religious and economic oppression, seeking greater opportunity. And that's what America is.